"What is that, a museum piece?" The words dripped with condescension as Specialist Tyler Reeves pointed at the rifle in the old man's hands. "Bro, my grandfather's grandfather used iron sights. We've got technology now." The laughter that followed echoed across the firing range at Fort Benning, sharp and thoughtless, the kind of mockery that comes easily to those who've never been humbled. The old man didn't respond. He simply ran his thumb along the worn wooden stock of the M1 Garand, feeling grooves that decades of hands had carved into the grain, and waited. What none of those young soldiers understood, what they couldn't possibly have known, was that they were about to witness something that would fundamentally reshape their understanding of marksmanship, technology, and the true meaning of skill. If you believe that wisdom beats equipment every time, type iron sights in the comments before you continue. The annual Fort Benning Marksmanship Invitational had grown considerably since its humble beginnings in 1987. What started as an informal competition between infantry units had evolved into a prestigious event drawing participants from across all branches, featuring categories for precision rifle, tactical carbine, and designated marksman. The prize money wasn't substantial, but the bragging rights were invaluable. Victory here meant something. It meant you were among the best shooters in the United States military. The 2022 iteration of the competition fell on a crisp November weekend, the Georgia air carrying just enough bite to make breath visible in the early morning hours. 63 competitors had registered across the various categories. Most were active duty, young men and women in their 20s and 30s equipped with the finest optical systems military budgets could procure. Trijikan ACO GS, Leupold Mark Vs, Schmidt and Bender PM2s, the scopes alone often cost more than a decent used car. Among the competitors, a small group had emerged as the clear favourites. Staff Sergeant Tyler Reeves, 27, had won the designated marksman category the previous 2 years running. His rifle, a customised M110 SAS, featured a Night Force Attacker scope worth nearly $4,000. He'd been profiled in military publications, consulted by equipment manufacturers, and was widely considered the finest marksman of his generation at Fort Benning. His entourage that morning consisted of 4 other soldiers, all members of his unit's competitive shooting team, all equipped with similarly impressive hardware. They'd set up in the staging area like royalty holding court, examining each other's equipment, making adjustments, and commenting loudly on the inadequacies of everyone else's gear. "Check out the guy in lane 12, Sergeant First Class Diana Morrison said, nodding toward the far end of the staging area. "I think he wandered in from a Civil War reenactment." The others turned to look. The man in question appeared to be somewhere north of 80 years old. He wore faded jeans, a flannel shirt that had seen better decades, and a baseball cap bearing the logo of a feed store that had probably closed before any of them were born. His face was a topographical map of age, deep lines carved by sun and time, pale blue eyes nested in wrinkles that suggested a lifetime of squinting against bright horizons. But it was his rifle that drew their attention, an M1 Garand, the weapon that had won World War II, that their great-grandfathers had carried across Europe and the Pacific, that belonged in museums and memorial displays. No scope, no red dot, no holographic sight. Just iron sights, the original front post and rear aperture that soldiers had used when Eisenhower was Supreme Allied Commander. The old man was cleaning the weapon with methodical care, running a worn cloth along the barrel, checking the action with movements so practiced they seemed almost unconscious. "Is he actually going to compete with that thing?" Reeves asked, genuine disbelief colouring his voice. "Regulations say any rifle chambered in an approved calibre," Morrison replied, checking her phone. .30-06 qualifies. Doesn't say anything about requiring optics. It doesn't need to say it. It's implied by basic logic. You can't compete at this level with iron sights. The precision requirements alone make it impossible. Reeves shook his head. "Someone should tell Grandpa this isn't the county fair. Why don't you tell him yourself?" The voice came from behind them. Master Sergeant William Chen, one of the event coordinators, had approached without anyone noticing. He was a compact man in his 50s, known for his dry demeanour and zero tolerance for disrespect. "Or are you only brave when the target of your jokes can't hear you?" Reeves had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. "Master Sergeant, I just meant that competing with that equipment is going to be embarrassing. For him, I mean. Someone should explain the performance gap before he humiliates himself." Chen's expression didn't change. The registration is open to all eligible participants. Mr. Holloway paid his entry fee and passed the safety certification. What he chooses to compete with is his business. Holloway? Morrison asked. Never heard the name. No reason you would have. Chen's eyes lingered on the old man for a moment before returning to the group. Competition brief is in 20 minutes. I suggest you focus on your own preparations. The brief was held in a covered pavilion adjacent to the primary range. Colonel Marcus Webb, the installation's deputy commander, welcomed the competitors and outlined the day's events. 3 stages increasing in difficulty. Stage 1, static targets at 200 meters, timed fire. Stage 2, variable distance targets from 100 to 400 meters, unknown range, limited time. Stage 3, the championship round, precision shots at 500 meters on targets the size of playing cards. For those of you who've competed before, Webb announced, you'll notice we've added a new element to Stage 3 this year. In addition to the standard targets, we've placed a special challenge target at 500 meters, a 1921 silver dollar, mounted edge-on. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A silver dollar edge-on at 500 meters was a target roughly 1/8 of an inch wide. Hitting it wouldn't just require precision, it would require something closer to divine intervention. This is a voluntary challenge, Webb continued. No points are awarded for attempting it, but anyone who successfully strikes the coin will receive a special recognition and a permanent place on the installation's marksmanship honor roll. In the 35-year history of this competition, the coin challenge has been attempted over 200 times. It has never been successfully completed. The old man, seated at the back of the pavilion, showed no reaction to this announcement. His weathered hands rested on the garand across his lap, fingers occasionally moving along the stock in what might have been habit, or might have been affection. Reeves, seated near the front, leaned over to Morrison. Impossible shot. Nobody's making that with any equipment, let alone museum pieces. The math doesn't work, Morrison agreed. Even with perfect conditions, the margin of error at that range exceeds the target width. You'd need luck more than skill. Luck is just skill that hasn't been explained yet, a quiet voice said. They turned to find the old man had somehow moved to a seat directly behind them without either noticing. Up close, his eyes were sharper than his aged appearance suggested, carrying a depth that seemed almost unsettling. "Excuse me?" Reeves said. "Something my instructor used to say, long time ago." The old man smiled, revealing teeth that were surprisingly intact for his apparent age. He also used to say that a man who trusts his equipment more than himself has already lost, but that's probably outdated thinking. Reeves opened his mouth to respond, but Colonel Webb was calling for attention again, announcing the start of Stage 1. The competitors filed out to the range, taking assigned lanes, preparing equipment. The old man moved slowly, that shuffling gait of advanced age, settling into lane 12 with his ancient rifle. The contrast was almost painful to observe. On either side of him, soldiers half his age or younger adjusted sophisticated optics, checked electronic wind meters, consulted ballistic calculator apps on their phones. The old man simply raised his rifle, worked the action to chamber a round from the end block clip, and waited. Stage 1 proceeded as expected. The 200-meter targets were generous, 18-inch circles that most competitors struck with ease. Reeves shot a perfect score, as did Morrison and 2 others from their team. The old man also shot a perfect score, though his method drew stares from nearby competitors. Where others took careful aim through magnified optics, he simply raised the rifle, settled his cheek against the stock and fired. 8 rounds in less than 30 seconds, all centre mass. "Lucky," Reeves muttered, examining the target through his spotting scope. Anyone can hit paper at 200 meters. But there was something in his voice that hadn't been there before, a note of uncertainty. Stage 2 separated the serious competitors from the hobbyists. Variable distance targets, range unknown, time limited. This was where optical advantage should have been decisive. Modern scopes featured range-finding reticles, calibrated holdover marks, all the technological assistance that decades of engineering could provide. Iron sights offered none of this, just a post, an aperture, and the shooter's judgment. The old man stood at his lane, studying the range. Targets were arrayed at distances that would only be revealed when the timer started. Competitors would have to estimate range, adjust aim, and fire, all within strict time limits. Missing meant penalties. Hesitation meant running out of time. Chen was working as a range safety officer nearby. He watched the old man with an expression that was difficult to read. When the timer began, chaos erupted. Competitors scrambled to acquire targets, estimate ranges, calculate holdover. Scopes swiveled, triggers clicked, brass flew. The old man raised his rifle. He licked his finger and held it up briefly, testing the wind. Then he began shooting. His movements were unhurried, almost leisurely, each shot following the last with a rhythm that seemed disconnected from the frantic energy around him. He didn't appear to be calculating. He didn't appear to be estimating. He simply pointed and fired, worked the action, pointed and fired again. When the timer buzzed, signaling the end of the stage, the old man had cleared all 12 targets, every single one, at distances ranging from 100 to 400 meters, with nothing but iron sights and a wet finger to gauge the wind. He'd shot a perfect score. The scoring officials checked and rechecked. The results stood. Several competitors, including Morrison, had dropped points on the longer-range targets. Reeves had shot clean, but his time was 4 seconds longer than the old man's. How? Morrison demanded during the break between stages. She'd cornered the old man near the water station, her tone mixing accusation with genuine bewilderment. How are you doing that? You can't even see the targets clearly at those distances without magnification. The old man filled a paper cup with water and drank slowly before answering. Who says I can't see them? Basic ophthalmology says you can't. The human eye loses the ability to resolve fine detail at distance. That's why we invented scopes. The human eye loses a lot of things with age, the old man agreed. But it also gains some. Experience, pattern recognition, the ability to see what should be there even when the details are fuzzy. He crushed the paper cup and dropped it in the trash. Your scopes show you a magnified image of reality. Very useful, very precise. But they also show you too much. Every imperfection in your position, every tremor in your hands, every gust of wind becomes visible and distracting. You start compensating for things that don't need compensating. You start thinking instead of shooting. He tapped the side of his head. Iron sights show you less, but sometimes less is more. You see the target. You see where your front sight is. You put one on the other and press the trigger. Simple, clean, no distractions. Morrison stared at him. That's not how precision marksmanship works. Maybe not anymore, but it's how it worked for a very long time, and some of us never forgot. He turned and shuffled back toward lane 12, leaving Morrison standing with her paper cup, her $4,000 scope, and her certainty that the world made sense. Stage 3, the championship round, 500 meters, targets the size of playing cards, and somewhere out there, glinting in the afternoon sun, a silver dollar mounted edge on. The impossible shot. 200 attempts over 35 years, 0 successes. Reeves approached his lane with renewed determination. Whatever the old man's tricks were, they wouldn't work here. 500 meters was beyond effective iron sight range. The target size demanded precision that naked eyes simply couldn't achieve. Physics would reassert itself, and the natural order would be restored. 17 competitors had qualified for the championship round. Reeves was in first place, the old man in second, separated by time differential. Morrison had squeaked in at 15th. Colonel Webb addressed the finalists personally. This is what you've trained for. 5 shots, best 4 count toward your score. Take your time, trust your equipment, trust yourselves. He paused. And for those attempting the coin challenge, remember that it carries no score penalty for missing. Attempting the impossible is its own form of courage. The old man checked his rifle one final time. 8 rounds remained in his ammunition supply loaded into a fresh unblocked clip. More than enough for 5 shots with 3 to spare. His movements were calm, measured, unchanged from the morning's casual confidence. Reeves shot first as the current leader. He took his time, adjusting his scope, checking his wind reading, settling into a position he'd practiced thousands of times. His first shot struck the playing card target dead center. His second followed, slightly right but still scoring. Third shot center, fourth shot center. 4 hits, 4 scores. Excellent shooting by any standard. He didn't attempt the coin. Not worth the risk of looking foolish, he murmured to Morrison as he cleared his lane. Let the old timer try it. Should be good for a laugh. Other competitors followed. Scores varied. Several dropped shots entirely, the pressure and distance combining to defeat months of preparation. When the 12th shooter finished, The leaderboard had Reeves firmly in first, with a comfortable margin. Then the old man stepped to the line. The range fell quiet. Word had spread about his earlier performances, about the iron sights, about the wet finger wind checks. Competitors who dismissed him that morning now watched with undisguised interest. Chen, still working as RSO, moved closer to the old man's position. "Mr. Holloway, you're clear to fire when ready." The old man nodded. He raised the garand, settling the stock against his shoulder with the familiarity of a lifetime. The iron sights aligned, front post centering in the rear aperture. 500 meters downrange, a playing card fluttered slightly in the breeze. He didn't hurry, didn't appear to calculate. Simply breathed, settled, and pressed the trigger. The garand barked, that distinctive pingless report of a partial clip. Downrange, the playing card sprouted a hole dead center. "Hit," the spotter announced. Unnecessary confirmation of what everyone could see through their own optics. Second shot, center hit. Third shot, center hit. Fourth shot, center hit. Reeves's jaw had tightened progressively with each shot. 4 for 4. Perfect score. Tied for first place, with the tiebreaker going to the old man based on his faster time in Stage 2. The old man lowered his rifle slightly, then raised it again. But his point of aim had shifted. He was no longer looking at the playing card. "He's going for it," someone whispered. "He's actually going for the coin." 500 meters, a silver dollar edge-on, 1/8 of an inch of target, iron sights. The mathematics said impossible. The history said impossible. Every law of optics and probability said impossible. The old man licked his finger and raised it to the wind, a gesture that had drawn laughter that morning. No one was laughing now. He held the position for a long moment, feeling something invisible, calculating something incalculable. Then he lowered his hand to the rifle, settled his cheek against the stock, and became very still. The world seemed to hold its breath. 63 competitors, a dozen officials, Colonel Webb himself, all watching an 80-something-year-old man with a 70-year-old rifle attempt something that had never been done. The shot broke clean. The garand's report rolled across the range, followed by a long moment of absolute silence. Then the spotter's voice, cracking with disbelief. "Hit. The coin is hit. We have a hit on the coin." For a moment no one moved. The words didn't seem to process, didn't seem possible, didn't seem to belong to any reality where physics still applied. Then Chen was moving forward, shaking the old man's hand, and the range erupted in chaos. Competitors abandoned their positions to crowd around lane 12. Officials were sprinting downrange to verify, to photograph, to confirm what the spotting scope had shown. Colonel Webb was on his radio, summoning someone, his face wearing an expression of shock that military discipline couldn't quite suppress. How? Reeves had pushed through the crowd, his voice stripped of arrogance, stripped of everything but raw bewilderment. How is that possible? That shot cannot be made. The variables, the margin of error, the limitations of iron sights at that distance, it cannot be done. The old man ejected the partial clip from his garand, the distinctive ping finally sounding, and began the ritual of clearing and safing his weapon. "Young man, I've been shooting since before your father was born, probably before your grandfather was born. Every day for 73 years, I've had a rifle in my hands. You want to talk about variables? About margins of error? I've made shots you couldn't imagine, under conditions you couldn't survive, with equipment that would make that grand look like a space-age wonder." He met Reeves's eyes. "The shot can be made, just not by someone who doesn't know how. Mr. Holloway." The voice belonged to Colonel Webb, who had approached with another officer in tow, a man wearing stars on his collar, a general. The crowd parted instinctively. "Mr. Holloway, I'd like to introduce Brigadier General Patrick Chen. He specifically requested to be here today when he heard you'd registered for the competition." The general was perhaps 60, Asian features bearing the weathered look of a career soldier. His eyes were fixed on the old man with an intensity that seemed disproportionate to the situation. "I grew up on stories about you," the general said. "My father served in your unit. Sergeant First Class David Chen. He spoke about you every single day until the day he died." The old man's expression changed. Something flickered in those pale eyes, a memory surfacing from deep water. "Little David, the kid from Sacramento who couldn't shoot worth a damn until I got hold of him. That's him. He said you turned him into a marksman, Said you could shoot the wings off a fly at 400 meters with nothing but iron sights and God-given talent. The general's voice carried emotion that stars on collars usually concealed. Said you saved his life at Iadrang, and at Pleiku, and at least 3 other times he never told me about because the memories were too painful. The crowd had gone very quiet. Iadrang, Pleiku, names that meant something different to soldiers, that carried the weight of history and sacrifice. My father kept a photograph of you on his desk until the day he died, the general continued. Called you the finest shooter he ever knew, the finest man he ever served with. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a faded photograph. Sergeant Major James Holloway, Charlie Company, 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry, regimental sniper, 78 confirmed kills, all with iron sights because he refused to use a scope even when they became available. Said scopes were a crutch for people who hadn't learned to see properly. Reeves looked like he might collapse. Morrison had gone pale. Around the crowd the revelation rippled outward, the name connecting to stories, to legends, to the kind of battlefield history that got taught in military academies and special forces selection courses. You're the Iron Horse, someone breathed. You're actually the Iron Horse. The nickname was legend. A sniper so deadly, so precise, that enemy forces had reportedly offered bounties for his head. A man who'd served 3 tours in Vietnam, refusing promotion above sergeant major because he wouldn't leave the field. Who'd been credited with turning the tide of at least 2 major engagements through precision fire that enemy commanders thought was artillery, until they found the bullet holes. Haven't been called that in a long time, the old man said quietly. Hoped I'd never be called it again. Sir, why? Chen the RSO, William Chen, had pushed forward, and suddenly his features, examined more closely, bore a resemblance to the general. Father and son, perhaps, or uncle and nephew. Why are you here? Why register for a competition under an assumed name? Why hide who you are? The old man was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades. My wife passed last year. 58 years married. She was the one who kept me grounded, kept me human, kept me from drowning in the memories of what I did. When she died, I didn't know what to do with myself. Didn't want to be James Holloway anymore. War hero, living legend, all those things people want to call you when you'd rather just forget. He looked down at the Garand, running his hand along the stock. This rifle was my father's. He carried it in World War II, Normandy, Battle of the Bulge. Gave it to me when I shipped out for Vietnam, told me it would keep me safe if I treated it right. I've kept it all these years, cleaned it, maintained it, shot it when nobody was watching. It's the only thing from those times I couldn't let go of. He looked up at the crowd of young soldiers surrounding him. I came here because I needed to know if I still had it, if the skills I spent my whole life building were still there, or if they'd faded like everything else. Needed to know if I was still the man I used to be, or just an old ghost waiting to disappear. Sir, Reeves stepped forward. All the arrogance was gone from his face, replaced by something that looked like reverence or perhaps shame. This morning I made jokes about you, about your rifle, your age, your lack of equipment. I called you a museum piece. I suggested you didn't belong here, he swallowed hard. I was an idiot, I'm sorry. You were young, the old man corrected gently. Young and confident and equipped with the best gear money can buy. Nothing wrong with any of that. I was young once too. Thought my equipment made me special. Thought technology could replace training. Thought newer was always better. He gestured at the Garand. Then I spent 3 years in a jungle where technology failed constantly, where batteries died and scopes fogged and nothing worked except the basics, the weapon, the shooter, the connection between them. I learned that equipment is a tool, nothing more. The tool doesn't make the shot, the man makes the shot, the tool just helps. General Chen stepped forward. Sergeant Major Holloway, I came here today to present you with something that's been waiting for over 50 years. He produced a small case from his jacket. In 1968, you were nominated for the Medal of Honor for your actions at LZ Albany. The nomination was downgraded due to, and I quote, insufficient documentation of enemy casualties. The real reason, as the historical record now shows, was political pressure to minimize reported body counts during a particularly controversial period of the war. He opened the case. Inside, gleaming against velvet, was the Medal of Honor. Last year, Congress passed legislation allowing the review of downgraded nominations from the Vietnam era. Your case was among the first approved. The President signed the authorization 3 months ago. I specifically requested to be the one to inform you, in honour of my father and what you meant to him." The range had gone completely silent. Young soldiers who minutes ago had been mocking an old man's equipment now stood at attention without being ordered to, instinct taking over where protocol left off. The old man stared at the medal for a long moment. His weathered hands trembled slightly, though whether from age or emotion was impossible to tell. "I don't deserve that," he said finally. "The men who deserved it didn't come home. Martinez, Williams, Thompson, Jackson. Good men. Better men than me. They're the ones who should have medals." "They're the ones you kept alive as long as you could," General Chen said. "They're the ones who got to write letters home because your rifle kept the enemy's heads down. They're the ones whose families got to bury them with honour instead of having them disappear into the jungle because you covered their extraction." He pressed the case forward. "My father always said you never took credit for anything, said you'd refuse this if you could. But sir, with respect, this isn't about what you want. It's about what the nation owes. It's about recognising sacrifice. It's about telling young soldiers like these that service means something, that what you do in the darkness matters even if no one sees it." The old man took the case with trembling hands. He didn't open it further, didn't look at the medal inside, just held it like something fragile, something precious, something that carried more weight than its small size would suggest. "My wife would have wanted to see this," he said, and his voice cracked. "She always believed it would come someday. Said the truth has a way of finding the light no matter how deep you bury it." He looked up at the assembled soldiers, at the general, at the two Chens who connected across generations. She was right about most things. Should have listened to her more. The awards ceremony happened 3 weeks later at the Pentagon. Full honours, media coverage, the president placing the Medal of Honor around the neck of a man who'd waited 54 years for recognition. But for those who'd been at Fort Benning that day, the real ceremony had already happened. Had happened on a firing range with an impossible shot, with a silver dollar that now resided in a display case at the installation's headquarters. Staff Sergeant Tyler Reeves requested a transfer to the marksmanship training unit the following month. He spent 6 months learning the fundamentals he'd neglected in his rush toward technological superiority. Iron sights, breath control, the connection between shooter and weapon that no scope could provide. He became, by all accounts, a better marksman. More importantly, he became a better teacher, passing on lessons he'd learned from an old man with a Garand. "Your scope is a tool," he would tell his students, echoing words that had been spoken to him. "The tool doesn't make the shot. You make the shot. The tool just helps. And if you can't make the shot without the tool, you haven't really learned anything at all." James Holloway lived another 3 years after that competition. He spent them differently than the years before, emerging from the self-imposed anonymity that grief had created. He visited military installations, spoke to young soldiers, demonstrated techniques that dated back to his father's generation. He answered questions about Vietnam, about Ia Drang, about the men who'd fought and died in jungles half a world away, and always, always, he brought the Garand. The rifle his father had carried at Normandy, that he'd carried in Vietnam, that had made an impossible shot at Fort Benning when everyone said impossible shots couldn't be made. He'd let young soldiers hold it, feel its weight, understand its history. Then he'd show them how to use it. Iron sights aren't obsolete, he would say, those weathered hands demonstrating the proper grip, the proper stance, the proper way to align post and aperture. They're fundamental. Everything else builds on this foundation. Learn this first. Learn it until you can do it in your sleep, in the dark, in the rain, in conditions where everything else fails. Then, when you add your technology on top, you'll understand what it's actually doing for you. And you'll know you can survive without it if you have to. He passed away on a Tuesday morning in spring, peacefully, in the same house where he'd lived with his wife for 53 years. His funeral at Arlington drew thousands, including 3 Medal of Honor recipients, 2 former chairmen of the Joint Chiefs, and a retired brigadier general named Patrick Chen who delivered the eulogy. "He taught us that the greatest weapon is the one between your ears," Chen said, standing before the flag-draped casket. "He taught us that technology is a servant, not a master. He taught us that the basics never become obsolete, that fundamentals are called fundamentals for a reason, and that any soldier who thinks his equipment makes him special has already lost the most important battle." He paused, composing himself. "But mostly he taught us humility. He showed us that the most impressive people often look the least impressive, that the quiet old man in the corner might be a legend you've only read about. That judgment based on appearance is not just wrong, it's dangerous. It blinds us to wisdom. It deafens us to teaching. It makes us small when we could be learning to be great. At the graveside, after the rifle salute, after taps had faded into the Virginia air, a young soldier approached the casket. Private First Class Maria Santos, 19 years old, newly assigned to the marksmanship training unit. She'd never met James Holloway, had only heard the stories, seen the videos, studied the techniques he'd passed down. She came to attention, rendered a salute that would have made any drill instructor proud, and then placed something on the casket. A single .30-06 cartridge, unfired. The same caliber that had fed the Garand, that had made the impossible shot, that had changed the lives of everyone who'd witnessed it. A reminder that some things transcend technology, that some skills outlast generations, that the connection between a shooter and their weapon is something no scope, no red dot, no $4,000 optic can ever replace. The Garand went to the National Infantry Museum at Fort Benning, displayed alongside the silver dollar it had struck. A plaque tells the story for visitors who weren't there, who didn't see the old man lick his finger and read the wind, who didn't watch the impossible become possible through nothing but skill, experience, and 73 years of daily practice. But for those who were there, who witnessed it firsthand, no plaque is necessary. They carry the story in their memories. They pass it down to soldiers who come after. They remember the morning they laughed at an old man's iron sights, and the afternoon they learned what those iron sights could do in the right hands. Some lessons only come once. Some teachers only appear when you've grown arrogant enough to need them. James Holloway was both, a lesson and a teacher wrapped in weathered flannel and faded jeans, carrying wisdom in a rifle that belonged in a museum but still shot like it was 1944. The Iron Horse. The man who proved that impossible is just another word for not yet. That technology serves but never masters. That the fundamentals never fade no matter how sophisticated we become. If this story taught you that equipment doesn't make the warrior, if it showed you that experience outweighs innovation, if it reminded you that the quiet ones often have the most to teach, then subscribe to this channel. We share stories of heroes who never sought recognition, legends who walked among us unnoticed, warriors who proved that skill built over a lifetime can never be replaced by gadgets bought last week. Share this video with someone who needs the reminder, and the next time someone mocks the old ways, the simple tools, the fundamental techniques that built every modern advance, remember James Holloway. Remember the iron sights. Remember the coin at 500 yards that everyone said couldn't be hit, and the old man who hit it anyway.